So basically I had just completely decided like there's no way I'm climbing this thing. But then Scott gets on and he's just falling multiple times and splashing around and having the best time, and it really inspired me to actually put my shoes on and try. And so I tried it once and I fell like way before the crux, not because the move was hard, but because all I could think about was this pot of orcas waiting to eat me, and also this like freezing cold water. It was September, it was not hot out, it was really windy. And then I think Scott was just so kind and patient, and he was willing to sort of problem solve, and he offered to put his legs in the water, so he was the orca bait, not me. And then he was like fighting the current to stay like literally right below me, so like the second I hit the water, I could be out. And it was really, really nice and kind, and I felt so supportive. And I did send, and the first time I pulled the crux, I sent, which really shows that for me, it wasn't like the physical exertion that was the crux, it was sort of overcoming the fear. And now today, Majestic is definitely one of my favorite sends ever, and I 100% would not have sent without Scott. And I think this just really shows that like for the non-strength-based aspects of climbing, like who you surround yourself with like plays a large part in your attitude and motivation and psyche. And I think that same idea of community and collaboration that like can create success and scalable impact is extremely like applicable to the climate crisis, because we cannot solve the climate crisis as individuals, even though like setting personal goals around climate action like composting and minimizing fast fashion is absolutely like success and necessary and important, but we won't keep our communities safe or effectively address the climate crisis by focusing our individual actions alone. And so yeah, the climate crisis requires action across nations, collaboration across nations and communities, and diverse expertise from scientists, policymakers, and engineers and communities and indigenous knowledge holders. And sort of by leveraging these diverse strengths, we can actually develop and implement more effective solutions. And we, as individuals, can take part in this by focusing on relationship building, developing a deeper understanding of like our community members' needs, and then also cultivating solidarity-based systems based on reciprocity and care. So I guess really to just drive the point, the main lesson here is that climbing, like climate action, is an individual sport, but also a team sport, and sort of embodying the spirit of community and collaborating on solutions is critical for mitigating the climate crisis and all the things that go with it, like restoring our relationship with the planet, dismantling systems of oppression, curbing greenhouse gas emissions, and equipping communities for what's to come. And so how you can translate this into your life is sort of focus on like sharing knowledge, skills, and resources, and this could look like so many things, but community gardens, being involved in local politics to understand sort of what the community needs to be more resilient, carpool initiatives like repurposing old gear and clothes, and then it could be as simple as like if you know how to fix a bike, like helping someone fix their bike. Also engaging in community and grassroots activism, so volunteering for local nonprofits, like planning crag cleanups, or even sort of like if you have funds, like donate them to initiatives that are working on protecting the areas where you recreate. And then lastly, when you're buying gear, like support brands that are actually like demonstrating that they're supporting grassroots activism as well, because that's very important. And so this next climate resilient lesson is rooted in this idea that climbing thrives on constant learning. And the practice of constant learning involves seeking out new data and acquiring new knowledge, and then applying it and adjusting it as needed. And a big part of pushing yourself in climbing is falling and failing, as we all know, and climbers are pretty analytical and like reflect on their mistakes. And we're also always learning from more experienced peers, like through guidebooks or training plans or different betas. So it's definitely super like based on constant learning. And while short-term goals, like specific routes and projects, can be achieved and completed, like one really cool thing about the sport is that there's like always room to grow, whether that's like physical strength or just managing your rope when you're on a multi-pitch, or even just your attitude, like always can be improved. And I really feel strongly that embracing this has been a huge part of my growth in climbing. And since I started climbing, like one thing that has been really constant throughout is just getting injuries. None of them have been critical, but they put me out for long periods of time. And one example of how continued learning has really helped me is when I popped my first pulley. I was in Bishop, and there happened to be like a ton of pro climbers around, and I just had no shame walking up to every single one of them and asking them like how they heal their injury, because they have access to the best trainers and sort of the best rehab facilities, and they were so nice and like welcoming to that. And now when I have pulley injuries, I've really done a lot of trial and error with what they told, and I feel like I have a really good system where pulley injuries like don't take me out for that long. And I get a pulley injury like every year, so. And as I touched on earlier, while climbing can really feel like an individual sport at times, sort of this being able to learn from our peers through knowledge exchange is like a really essential component of climbing. And this, like I said, this is reflected through beta and training and coaching and guidebooks. And thinking about how that can apply to climate, like climate resilience is this like imprecise science that can feel so big, like it can be hard to even know like where to start. And it's also compounding that is constantly evolving. So you are constantly having to like pivot and change your approach to solving it. And in the climate context, continued learning looks like equipping ourselves with the latest knowledge, tools, and technologies to face climate challenges effectively, staying adaptable and ready to adjust our strategies based on new information. And then also constantly and like iteratively developing better communication and collaboration and sort of decision-making skills to navigate like the complexities. It's also important to just be open to starting anywhere and knowing it's going to take a lot of trial and error, and also just like being okay and sitting with the fact that it's like can be really contradictory and nuanced and complicated. And so how you can translate this into your life is just believing in the power of change and being open-minded about like how and where change can happen, and also embracing people who have different backgrounds and perspectives, because collective knowledge and activism is most impactful when you have diverse perspectives. Also experimenting with things in your own life, which can look different for everyone, but it can be like challenging yourself to like not use single-use plastics for a whole week, or going like a whole day without your car, or even just talking to someone that you wouldn't have talked to otherwise. And then lastly, just like gather as much data as you can. So when you go to a new place, like always ask the locals, like how are they being impacted by climate change? Like what are their needs? And even just taking note of your own actions, like sometimes we're not even aware of like when we're using single-use plastic. So like think about like what data can you collect from your own life where you can integrate change. And then lastly, climbing itself has a relatively low impact. However, a big part of climbing in Montana is that we really have to travel to do the sport, and travel to climbing destinations oftentimes relies on airplanes and long car rides, and that contributes to carbon emissions. And some people believe that we shouldn't travel and we shouldn't bring carbon emissions, but I really don't think we're quite there yet. And I think this is because we as humans just like need opportunities to have joy and growth. And mindful, low impact travel to climbing destinations can connect us with nature and foster personal growth. And this growth in turn fuels our desire to protect the environment. And what this can look like is like carpooling to climbing destinations, or leaving no trace when you're adventure climbing, and taking advantage of like public transportation when you're traveling instead of relying on Ubers and taxis. And also the joy of climbing isn't limited to far-flung destinations. Like strong local climbing communities foster collaboration and resilience. So I guess the lesson here is like climbing itself, which has a low ecological impact. We should find ways to mirror that and experience adventure and growth while practicing responsible travel through mindful choices. And obviously everyone has different means and resources to do that, so that's going to look different for everyone, but the key takeaway here is that just adventuring with a low ecological footprint is important because it deepens people's understandings of climate and like what needs to be done that like staying home wouldn't do. And it also offers joy, which is the basis of hope, and that lays the foundation for people to take action in their own lives in the ways that they're able to. And so I guess what you can do is sort of seek out joy and growth, because doing so leads to hope and action, and also explore more areas close to home. And then when you do travel, always like support the local businesses and engage with the community members so you can really be part of what's going on there. And then in terms of flying, you can reduce your carbon emissions by taking more direct flights, because takeoff and landing are sort of the most carbon intensive part of flying, and direct flights also tend to fly at a higher altitude, which has like better fuel economy. And then lastly, use your voice and actions to advocate for climate resilience in your community. And thank you all.